Roosevelt, do solemnly swear.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution.
The Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
So we are going to go on to Article 1, Section 8, and the next two clauses, Clause 7 and Clause 8, are pretty self-explanatory. There's not a lot of history to it. There's not a lot of changes that have happened. They are pretty black and white. I tried to do some research on them, but came up, pretty much short on a lot of stuff, whereas Clause 9 has a tremendous amount we can talk about. Give me a second. Clause 7 is the Congress shall have the power to establish post offices and post roads. It's interesting. For most of the first century of American independence, the post office was by far the largest and most important organization within the federal government. And so, of course, Congress has the power to set up post offices and build roads connecting them. So as far as business and even residential, passing mail and everything, they used to be very important, but with technology, emails, and internet in general, the physical post office has gone by the wayside. I mean, it's still a major organization, but is a fraction of what it used to be 20, 40, 50, 100 years ago. It's a fraction of what it was. Even 100 years ago, it was a lot bigger organization within the government. So anything anybody wants to add to that, or clause number 7? All right. Clause number
one. Quick.
Yeah, go, Sherry.
Just one of those, what do you call it, where it's just a little snippet, but
yeah.
I think it's interesting, today, if we want to mail a letter, we pay for the postage. Well, back then, the person receiving the letter paid for the postage.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I did not know that. Never heard that.
The recipient, and it was kind of expensive back then, I think. And it was based on how many pages and how many miles it was being carried.
Okay.
And then the people that were the postal people that were delivering the mail, their salary, they would get so much for each letter they delivered. So that's how they made their money.
Okay.
And, yeah. So, I mean, and actually during the Civil War and actually before that, people would, if they sent one page, they did not waste any part of that page. They wrote down the sides, across the top.
Sure.
There were no margins of anything because it cost so much per page. So they would really be frugal on that. They'd write small.
Yeah, right.
So
interesting.
Trivia. That's it. Trivia.
Well, no, but that's interesting because it comes down to value. In other words, if you receive a letter, then you place the value on that. If you find this person that sent me the letter, I have no value with you, I don't care about you or anything, I don't want to know what you're sending me, then you don't value that, and so you don't pay for it. And I find that real interesting. And of course, then the postal delivery guys would be contractors, and it would be up to them. It's almost kind of like a waiter and waitress getting a tip, in that, which, boy, I thought we ate out yesterday and I could almost do an entire show on waiters and waitresses, and what tip and that kind of stuff. And most of them, don't get me started. No, get me started on. But anyway, value, very interesting. Go ahead, AviGayle.
One quick thing.
Yeah.
Congress, get this. Now, Congress doesn't ever have to follow the rules that they set. They put it in there that during the sessions of Congress, that their letters could be carried free of postage. But they were on their honor not to send any letters but their own. So I thought that was interesting. Even back in 1770, 1780 something, they kind of put in there. But I mean, it was because they weren't working. That was a perk to their, they weren't paid what they're paid today. But I just thought it was interesting. I guess I shouldn't be critical of them because they really did serve their country back then. Today, they're just a bunch of paid political hacks up there. They're,
Don't get us started. Don't get us started.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
AviGayle, what were you going to
I was going to say it's an interesting spin because nowadays, when you send something, especially a business, you pay for that, especially if there's something very important. You deem the value of what you're sending to that individual, and if there's a price you pay. I mean, I dealt a lot with that type in my business. That when I worked, there was a lot of things that I had to export to people, and because of the ramifications of what was being sent, there would be more value on the sending, and so then the person that received it. When they received it, it carried even more value with the information that was inside it. So it's just interesting the value that we put on. The receiving, and now how many people get letters or cards from people? Which is I remember Brad Scott and Carol before he passed away. They'd cry because people were sending him cards.
Right.
And
Physical cards.
Yeah, and he was like saying, "Oh my goodness!" And he says, "We never get cards or letters from people. Does anybody send me anything?" So it's interesting again the value of that kind of
very good point.
mail, if you will. And I thought that was interesting, Sherry, because and again you had the Pony Express. And so you had to pay for I used to love the Pony Express. When I was a kid, I didn't live during the time of the Pony Express, but it captivated me. I would think about and the circuit riding preachers, they would travel. But anyhow, I digress. I go off on a rabbit trail, but
no, it's okay. Very good though. Yeah.
It's just interesting in perspective of where we are today, and where the money is flowing and the value of where the money is. It's just interesting how things make a major spin.
It's too bad to me. Sometimes I think about the post office and, I sometimes feel bad about the fact that a lot of people have lost their jobs simply because the post office is a fraction of the organization that it used to be. Because we don't need to send physical things anymore. You can put an attachment on an email and get exactly the same thing and print it out on your printer. That right there, you're paying for the ink and the paper to print something out when you get an email and an attachment, that type of thing. So it's similar. All right, going on to Clause 8. The Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. So Congress has the power to set up a system of copyrights and patents, granting creative people the exclusive right to sell their creations. It's a good thing. Really black and white. There's not a whole lot that the person can say about that, but it's a good thing that they recognize this enough to actually put it in the Constitution. So if you're ever questioned about what you're doing and you have something of value that you created that nobody else has, you have the right now, based on the Constitution of the United States, to say, this is my right, and I created this, and it belongs to me, and you can't take that from me. You know, I mean, AviGayle, you wrote a book. Isn't it nice for the fact you now have the constitutional right that book is yours and nobody else can claim that. Without this in the Constitution, you don't have that right.
And we've done that with our music too. Every time we wrote a song, we went through that whole process with the government. And and I made sure I would say, James, we've got to have this, this has to be signed, sealed, and delivered. It doesn't, I don't know if it's still as, I don't know if people still exercise that as much as we did it a lot. I mean,
yeah. I
know you are familiar with it because during the organic
the Lamb radio part of it, I dealt with it for many years, 7 years. I dealt with the copyright. Massive amounts of money that I had to pay into that. We called them the music mafia because of their copyright stuff. Anyway, all right. So moving on to clause 9, and this
Sherry has something.
Oh, I'm sorry, Sherry. You had some. I didn't know. Go ahead.
Well, they had for a while that there's been court cases that have judged whether something could be copyrighted or not. And one of the cases went to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled it was over a photograph. It said a photograph could be copyrighted. A lower court had said that that it couldn't be copyrighted because it was just mere advertisement. But when the Supreme Court said that it could be copyrighted, they talked about the paintings that had been out there, Whistler and Rembrandt and Degas and like that. So I found that was interesting that they had court cases over what could and could not be copyrighted.
Well, it's been the battle forever. They've always battled, but this I thought that it was interesting. It was quite detailed to me. Congress shall have the power to promote the progress of science and the useful arts by securing for limited times to authors and inventors the exclusive right to their respective writings and discoveries. So that's pretty specific. You get down to it. All right, moving on to clause 9. To constitute tribunals, Congress has the right to constitute tribunals inferior to the Supreme Court. Okay, in our earlier Constitution studies, we found out about the Supreme Court, and we now know that the Congress has the power to set up lower level federal courts that report to the Supreme Court. Of course, the Supreme Court is the highest court in the federal system. It's often called the highest court in the land because it hears appeals from state courts as well as federal courts. It has 9 justices and begins its term on the first Monday in October of each year. The court system has grown over time. Today, there are 12 circuit courts of appeals, plus 94 federal district courts, plus dozens of other special courts. And like I say, I learn from this show. So my research from going in there helps me to keep me cut and dry on exactly what these things are, even though if you talk about them in general, I would probably recognize this and understand where it comes. But by studying it out and looking at it, it helps me to see where all this falls in line. So let me read you a little of my research here. I hope it's not boring, but I think it's very interesting in how this all falls together. So under the Supreme Court, first of all, we're just going to talk about courts. In a minute, we're going to get into tribunals, which I think is a very interesting study. So talking about the courts, the federal courts hear cases involving the constitutionality of a law, cases involving the laws and treaties of the U.S. ambassadors, public ministers, disputes between two or more states, admiralty law, also known as marine law, and bankruptcy cases, which we've actually talked about in previous articles in the Constitution. The Court of Appeals, there are 13 appellate courts to sit below the U.S. Supreme Court, and they are called U.S. Courts of Appeals. The 94 pre-mentioned federal judicial districts are organized into 12 regional circuits, each of which has a court of appeals. The appellate court's task is to determine whether or not the law was applied correctly in the trial court. Appeal courts consist of 3 judges and do not use a jury. So you're going to bring whatever it is you don't think was a right judgment in the court you were in, you're going to bring it to the Court of Appeals, and there's 3 judges, and you have to abide by whatever these judges say, no matter what. Of course, you can always take it to the Supreme Court after that, but you have district courts. The nation's 94 district or trial courts are called the U.S. District Courts. District courts resolve disputes by determining the facts and applying legal principles to decide who is right. Trial courts include the district judge who tries the cases and a jury that decides the cases. So the difference between your courts of appeals and your district courts is that you actually get a jury here. Magistrate judges assist district judges in preparing cases for trial. They also conduct trials in misdemeanor cases. There is at least 1 district court in each state and the District of Columbia. Bankruptcy courts, we've talked about this before in other constitutional discussions. Federal courts have exclusive jurisdiction over bankruptcy cases involving personal business or farm bankruptcy. This means a bankruptcy case cannot be filed in a state court. So this is all federal because it's under the Supreme Court. Article 1 courts, that's what we're talking about right now because we're in Article 1, Section 8. Congress created several Article 1 or legislative courts that do not have full judicial power. Judicial power is the authority to be the final decider in all questions of constitutional law, all questions of federal law, and to hear claims that the core of habeas corpus issues. Article 1 courts are courts of appeals for veterans claims, courts of appeals for armed forces, and U.S. Tax courts. So that's what we're talking about in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 7, is that you have the Supreme Court, but they are in jurisdiction and have the power over the lower courts. So that just means that no matter what court you've been to, you can always go up on the ladder and end up at the Supreme Court. Now, what I found very interesting is that word tribunal, because that is literally the wordage here in Clause 9. To constitute tribunals inferior to Supreme Court. And so tribunal, right away, I wanted to know, what is a tribunal? And of course, the word tribe, we all know the word tribe. Which tribe are you from? You know, but it's interesting that, of course, back in these days, they thought of tribes, and you have Indian tribes. I mean, back in the days when all the courts and the Constitution and all the wars that they were having there had to do with Indians of the land and the different tribes that they had to. But the definition today of the word tribe is a social division in a traditional society consisting of families or communities linked by social, economic, religious, or blood ties with a common culture and dialect, typically having a recognized leader. So, boiling that down, a tribe could literally be a town or a city divided up into different sections, and you have different districts within a big city. You can have county courts and things like that. But that's the word tribe. What about bunal? Tribunal. Have you ever thought of that word, or that word even being a word before? Either of you at all?
No.
Don't go looking it up, because I'm going to tell you what.
I never heard of it. Never thought of it at all.
Okay, there is a word called bunal, and this is a conjunctional word. This is two words put together, and the word bunal means, it's a noun, it means a stick used in beating or whipping an animal or person, a club, a bat, a baton, or a billy club. So now, put the two words, a tribunal, meaning that you have a stick, which is the authority. In other words, if you're one of my children and I hold up a stick and say, you better stay in line, kids know what that stick means. They're going to get a spanking. And that stick has authority, meaning that this is the repercussions of doing something wrong. So you put tribunal together, and what do you have? You have the community and the authority over the community to make decisions based on things that go wrong. You see what I'm saying? I never thought about it. I never put that together. We've all heard the word tribunal. We all know that this is a justification system. It's a system set up by authorities in a community, in a tribe, to judge over things that happen. So I thought that was real interesting. You put the two together. The term tribunal is derived from the word tribune, which means lawyer, which means magistrates in the classical Roman Republic. So it goes all the way back to Roman rule. A tribunal is sometimes set up as a quasi-judicial. You guys knew that word was going to come around, didn't you? A tribunal is sometimes set up as a quasi-judicial institution that is set up to deal with problems such as resolving administrative or tax-related disputes. Tribunal, it performs a number of functions like adjudicating disputes, determines rights between contesting parties, makes an administrative decision, reviewing an existing administrative decision, and so forth. Quasi-judicial, a non-judicial body which can interpret law. It is an entity now actually, if you'll think about this and Torah and who we are with Torah, as we study out Torah and we study out the laws of God, this applies to us. A non-judicial body which can interpret law. It is an entity such as an arbitrator or tribunal board, generally of a public administrative agency, which has the powers and procedures resembling those of a court of law or judge, and which is obligated to obliged to objectively determine facts and draw conclusions from them so as to provide the basis for an official action. So thinking about studying Torah, we study Torah to understand God's view on the way we walk, on the halakha of our lives, and then we judge that. We interpret that law for our own lives and the others around us. I mean, we can use that law to determine, not to be Torah police, but to understand especially even in a Torah community, you would look at that. Such actions are able to remedy a situation or impose legal penalties, and they may affect the legal rights or duties of specific parties. There are some key differences between judicial and quasi-judicial bodies in that judicial decisions are bound by precedent in common law. So stop it. Let's stop right there. Stop and think of a judicial court. If you go before a judge and you have been accused of something and you have a lawyer, and then whoever's accusing you or the state also has a lawyer and they are trying you. If you bring up anything, if you're trying this, you are totally subject to the law that has already brought a precedent for. You cannot change that law or that precedent within that court system unless the judge decides that, or the judge or jury changes what has already gone before. So in other words, if you are tried for a specific thing and it's been done before, but the jury and or the judge has decided that in this particular case, under these circumstances, you are not guilty. There has just now been a precedent set for that particular case and that particular circumstance. So if it ever comes up into a court proceeding again, then your lawyer can bring up, or that lawyer can bring up your case as a precedent in the fact that this has been tried and judged before and can be judged the same way again. That is a judicial court and decision, whereas a quasi-judicial decision usually are not so bound. They are bodies, unlike courts, that may be a party in a matter and issue a decision thereon at the same time. So quasi-judicial system would be a much lower system. It would be, for instance, like a community clubhouse or something, or a community that doesn't have an official bound by the law type system. For instance, say you HOAs. Okay, HOAs are a great example of this. So if you move into a subdivision of a town and that subdivision has set up an HOA, in other words, their own community laws, like your lawn has to be mowed once a week. You can't put pink flamingos in your front yard, that type of thing. Okay, now that HOA is a quasi-judicial system, whereas even the people on the system can be a part of being taken to this court. You see what I'm saying? And to us, you know, if I'm not a rabbi and I'm a part of a Messianic congregation, and that rabbi, as we see it in our own Torah law, as being kind of the head over the congregation, we are now in a quasi-judicial system in that we are kind of bound to Torah law, but we are also bound to that congregational laws that they set up, probably based on their own halakha, their own interpretation of the scriptures. In other words, if you're part of a 2-house congregation, you couldn't go to a non-2-house congregation and have the same laws set up. You know, it's just, you see what I'm saying? So it does boil down to, we actually live in our own Torah communities, in our own Torah life, and the way that we live. we are living under a quasi judicial system, and we individually within our own lives base our lives under a quasi judicial system. So, but we are still bound to the government of our land, which is a judicial system. So I found that all really, 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 really interesting. Either of you want to respond to that at all?
I just like to say one thing about that, because it seems like right now in the court system, in the actual court system, like say local courthouse or something,
Sure,
that deals with maybe domestic problems, or just I just see a lot of gray in the court system these days, because to me it sounds like the quasi it has gray in it, because and it's not black and white. It's like you may set up some law, some some certain, like just say something happens within a family, and it seems at the time that it's a major case, if you will, in
sure.
some people's eyes. In other people's eyes, they say, no, this is just a domestic issue. This can be dealt with between us. This is not something that I need to take to the court.
Right.
Well, again, if you have a family, let's say any type of a family situation, whether it be in a congregation or whether it be in a development, and you have that community, if you will.
A domestic dispute. A domestic dispute.
A domestic dispute in
Right.
that kind of a quasi place where there
Right.
are rules and regulations.
Sure.
And you're dealing, and you know this, Mark, and you know this, Sherry, and I know this, we're dealing with the human race. And the human race can be different, a different perspective, a different,
Sure.
and they may have some emotional problems. They may have some extreme thinking about things. Well, to make a long story even longer, I see that the situation can be brought down to that quasi situation, even in a court system. I see that judges now
Yeah.
are more
You're right.
sensitive to the fact that, and I'm talking about this particular constitution, okay, if you will.
Uh-huh.
It's not as cut and dry. I think in this period of time, there was a lot of cut and dry, and they still have some of these laws concerning property, if you will,
Right.
and they're in black and white, and some judges will say, oh no, your property has this and you can't do anything because it's the grandfather clause, whatever.
Uh-huh.
But there'll be a judge that will say, wait a minute, that had to do with someone that probably had a farm on that property at one time. And so anyhow, what I'm saying is, it seems like there's more gray,
More and more.
and people are willing to say, let's deal with this outside of court. This is not really a case
Right.
that we have to bring it to the higher court, if you will, even
Right.
in the local court. That's what I'm seeing, and only because of what's going on, even in what's happening in the chaos of what's happening in all these different states. Do you see how the people are having some serious questions about what's a protester and what's a rioter, and what's going on here, and there's no line of reasoning,
Right.
even in the Constitution, about how these things are to be dealt with. Some people look at, well, I'm going to use one example. It happened yesterday. A reporter went to one of our voted in legal senators, if you will, and said, you see what's going on there in Seattle, the burning and the deaths and things that are happening? And he said, it's a myth. That's not really happening in Seattle.
Yeah.
And the reporter says, what? I've been there. I've been a reporter there. It's all over the news. It's just a myth. This is one of our elected officials, right? The reason I'm saying that is, Mark and Sherry and everybody else that's listening, I believe, and because I love the Constitution and I love the way it's written, But I think because of so much fiction that's put before the human eyes these days, so much fiction, like through movies and whatever, that people have a hard time with reality and in the truth.
Very true.
When they see a reality of something that's happening, that's causing death and chaos, they look at it, oh, that's just like that movie I saw. It's just a movie. I'm seeing it on the screen. It's not reality. It's just a myth. It's just something that you're seeing.
Gotcha.
And I say that with great concern about the human race and how they perceive when we have people's lives that are on people's lives that are on the line, if you will. And so, I mean, I think you can carry that to this quasi thing too.
Well, let me refine a little bit of what you're saying, and I agree. It seems to be getting more and more and more, but I'm going to use this point you're making here to say thank God for the United States of America and the system that they have set up, because when you take something to court, what you're doing is you're asking the court to make a decision based on the facts of what is going on. Sherry, we're getting your. I'm gonna mute you there. They're based on the facts, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. And so what you have is the law, and they have to abide by the law. And I'm going to also use this time to say thank God for lawyers, because the lawyers know the law, and that's what you have is ones that prosecute and the ones that defend. A lot of people say they hate lawyers and they wish there were no lawyers. I'm saying that if you don't have a lawyer, you're in a lot of trouble. It's probably never going to go your way. But if you have a lawyer that knows the law and knows ways that has happened in other court cases, like I was precedent that has happened before. But what we have is, I'm going to give you a little example of what you were talking about. The state of Massachusetts, and I know this because I know this, the state of Massachusetts has a $20,000 cap on suing a hospital or a doctor. In other words, if a doctor makes a mistake and you take that doctor to court, you can only get $20,000. There is a state cap on that, but the judge can wipe that cap out and give you $40 million. Okay, so the judge can make a decision, but even though the state has put a regulation or something like that, now it may have changed. This is the way it was a few years ago, but there used to be almost every state in the United States had done away with that cap. That cap was law a long time ago, and then state by state, and then Massachusetts just a few years back, I knew this was the deal because of a case that I knew of. But so the judge can make a decision, but once he does, they set a precedent that can also be used in a later trial. So what you're talking about, it sounds quasi-judicial. It's really not, because quasi-judicial only works outside the court. It doesn't work in a judicial court. So it sounds that way, but it literally is whether or not the judge and or the jury has the right to make a decision based on all the different evidence that's put forth. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that because I've had, because of another job that I had, I've had experiences in court settings with different situations with people.
Right.
And because of the gray areas of this situation, they had lawyers, they had people there that were the legal people, but unfortunately, the district of attorney had one agenda,
right?
The lawyer had another agenda, and we're talking human beings,
right?
They had their subjective reasoning, even though the law is what the law is. There can be manipulation with the law,
Right.
and people can dance with it and whatnot. And so if an individual, and if it's not presented in the right manner, and one time I had to say something during a court situation, and I know you're never supposed to speak when you're in when the court is in order.
Right.
I did. I raised my hand, and I said, I'm probably going to get thrown out. I don't know what's going to happen. And I raised my hand because I felt there was something in my heart that says some light has to be brought onto this because it's not being addressed in the light that it should be. And I raised my hand, and the judge recognized me and let me speak. And I was like, oh my goodness, I had favor. So I expressed myself. And let me tell you something, it changed the whole decision. It changed the whole decision that the both of the lawyers were trying to present it. Each one of them wanted this to be a case that wasn't good. But when I brought forth my message about it, it changed everything.
Spirit of God.
It was dismissed. It was dismissed.
Sure. Oh,
And
interesting.
it should have been dismissed. This was not a situation where anybody should have had anything thrown at them. It was one of those areas of quasi, in my mind. It was, but again, the judge had to make the decision. But if it was someone like me that had presented the information, you have to have information in order to make a quality decision, and the truth does trump.
Sure.
The truth trumps. I'm just saying the truth is prevailing. But I'm seeing lately that unfortunately, and it's very disheartening, that people don't recognize the Constitution or the law in the respect that I believe it deserves.
Yeah, of course.
People have their own agenda, unfortunately.
Right.
And I just believe that I it's lawlessness. Let's put it that way. It is literally what Yeshua said, lawlessness. And that's what's happening. They're not taking into account the Torah or the Constitution. And so they're making decisions based on their own lawless reasoning.
Right. Well, it's always required by the court system that the two parties sit down and try to resolve things before ever taking it to court. Because once you bring it before the courts, then they set a court date and then they go from there. If before a court date is set, you can resolve this between the two. That's your quasi-judicial system right there, is before taking it to the official court. Once it gets into the official court, all laws and everything else apply. Before going before a judge and or a jury, all of that can be totally, decided between the two. But if you have broken a law, a federal or a state law, and you're going against the state, which is the district attorney, if you're going against the district attorney, that's a whole different set. They can now present to you a lesser sentence, or you can only pay so much or stuff like that. But that is a judicial system. That is not a quasi-judicial system. Everything based before you get to the judicial system would be quasi.
Like what you said earlier, Mark, was evidence, facts first, and then decision. Unfortunately, again, and you can see it, you can do some research, things are being brought as a case before the facts are there.
Right.
When there's no facts there, yet they're causing someone to be caused guilty with no facts. You're not guilty until until proven guilty by the facts, and there's no facts, and yet they still. So I'm just saying we are in a generation of lawlessness.
Yeah, it's called circumstantial evidence. And without any facts or anything like that, you're just going on, well, this is the way it seemed. This is what happened. This is the deal. We have this. There's no evidence, or it looks like evidence. It's all called circumstantial. And
Or-
people have been convicted on circumstantial evidence many times.
I know, and a lot of people, just because they don't like you and
Right.
they want to throw something at you, and they have a certain amount of leverage and power.
Right.
Unfortunately, that happens today too. It's to me, it's lawlessness. Because you don't know. I mean,
I'm with you.
I'm controlling myself. I'm controlling myself.
I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
I'm just saying it's there.
It's really good though. I love this discussion because, quite honestly, if I was 20 years old, I'd be going to law school. I wish I would have when I was 20 years old, because that's really what I wanted to be. And so anyway, but Sherry, close us out. We're at the top of the hour, but close us out with your thoughts, your opinions, whatever you think there, and we're going to close the show.
I'm laughing because Bob comes from a long line of lawyers.
Oh, wow, yeah.
I mean, one of his aunts and uncles, they had like 12 or 14 kids, and every one of them had a law degree, even the two women, and that was back in the early 1900s. But that's another. So I always tell Bob, I said, you got to law your brain, and he does. He's really, he figures things out. But going back to how the courts are set up, the Jewish people have affected every culture that they've been in, everywhere. And if you go back and you look in Exodus where Jethro came to Moses, what did he tell him? You can't hear all these people all the time. Select.
Oh, that's right. I thought about that too.
Select able men who fear God.
Right.
Don't take bribes. They're honest. They're good, upstanding men who know the Torah, and let the minor disputes go before them, and then the others can be appealed to Moses himself. And that is kind of to me, a typology of what we have in our court system. That they have the lower courts, and then if they can appeal it on up to the Supreme Court. So where Moses would be the Supreme Court, so to speak, we have the Supreme Court with us. And then another thing which is interesting, they have what's called the tort laws, which is a personal injury or like an injustice is done. It actually comes from the French, I think, that means injustice. And I always think when they say tort laws, I think of Torah, even though they don't say it's linked. But the Torah gives us the rules for personal injury and or for the compensation that's given to a person, if certain things take place. So it's very, you think about how the Jewish people and the Torah has affected all of mankind, and a lot of our laws and our court system actually it has its roots in what God Almighty, the one over all the heavens and the earth, set into motion through the Jewish people. And we just don't even know it. So, I kind of think about that when I'm sitting here listening to all the different things. And what does it say in the letters? He said, settle with you're talking about the quasi-judicial.
There you go.
The instruction is settle with your brother before you go to the courts.
That's exactly right.
The courts, they're going to hold you really responsible. So what is that? Arbitration and mediation and all that they have set up. We're actually supposed to settle things between us, come to an agreement.
That's quasi-judicial. That's what it's about. Yes.
We had when we had our house in Olive Branch, we were right on the border between Olive Branch and South Haven, and we had covenants with the subdivision we were in, and every house had to have so many acres on it and all this. But one of the things was that they could have horses on their property, and even though the city might not allow that, the covenants on that subdivision said that, and the guy who bought our house bought it because he could have horses on it. So that was a selling point. So I was glad of those covenants.
Sure,
Those
sure.
homeowners association. I'm like,
That's
hey,
right.
build
That's
our
right.
home. No, well, actually, I can't say that because I have to give credit to the Lord. We prayed about it, and it was during
Amen.
the market downturn. And I mean, we even had people going like, that house is for sale, and that house is for sale, and you sold your house. And we're going like, yeah, because we serve the God. God really got us out of that house.
Right.
But anyway, that's another story
Right.
of God's goodness and gracious and kindness to us. But I just thought I'd bring that out about how
Very
the Jewish
good.
people have affected the entire world everywhere that they have lived, and people have taken up the principles of Torah even in their laws.
Amen. One of the shows that I really want to start, and I will, is a show called Justice. I would love to have a show, and we take individual injustices that have happened in our country, in our world, and talk about them, bring them to Torah, bring them to discussion on things. But I would love to have a show called Justice. My wife says my middle name should have been Justice, just because injustices just blood. You take the blood pressure cuff off of me when there's an injustice around, because it'll explode a rotator or a cuff there. Anyway,
That's having the mind of the Lord. How do you think he feels when he sees that? I don't see how he deals with it other than his grace and his mercy. Mercy is not getting what we deserve, and grace is getting something we didn't deserve. And that's the only way we're operating in the earth.
That's exactly right. AviGayle, and I'm so appreciative of your coming in and sharing with us and giving your input. It is very valuable to me, very valuable, and I appreciate everything that you bring to the show. Thank you so much.
I enjoy it because everything you bring to the table is always timely. I mean, it's dealing with what's happening today, even though we're talking about something that was written hundreds of years ago.
Yeah, really.
And so I just like to see where the human race is as far as what was written and based on the word, and where people are today. So thank you, Mark. What you're doing really is, to me, is so very, very valuable itself.
I enjoy it. And there's never enough time to talk about even individual little things, So Sherry, quite invaluable to me too. I really, really, really appreciate your input on everything. It helps me to see a side, both of you. By all three of us, we come from such different areas. It's like teaching Torah. There's so many different areas, and you could talk about the Constitution, and it's areas I never even think about. I never even thought would be a part of it. So
we all learn from each other, iron sharpening iron. I've learned a great deal, and I was a history major, so there you have it.
Well, I hope that my research helps to spark things with you guys to see some things from a different point of view and bring out things that, like tribunal. It was that cool at all. It's like bringing a club to a tribe. It's okay, here's the tribunal. But
Moses had a staff.
That's what it means. That's right. That's staff. There you go. I got you. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us, and we will be back next week talking about Clause 10, which is piracies. Let's talk about pirates. Har! All right. Hey, did you guys know that there were going to be pirates at Armageddon? They're the ones that'll be going through going, Harmageddon! All right. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you next week. Everybody, thanks for joining the Messianic Lamb Network, and stay tuned. Go to the website. There's an unbelievable amount of things happening all kinds of videos and shows that you don't even know about are on the website and only on the website. So go check out MessianicLambNetwork.com. And hey, everybody, we'll see you next week.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.
I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States. So help me God.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.
Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear.
I, Dwight D. Eisenhower, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States. So help me God.